It's Ronald, the rules lawyer, and today we're going to talk about the rules for mythic monsters, the new rules that Pathfinder is releasing in its new book, War of Immortals. War of Immortals introduces mythic rules, more power for player characters, and also for monsters. It coincides with a historic event in the Galarian campaign setting, the death of a god, the god of battle. This book talks about that, which is called the God's Ring, and also brings new player options, including new classes that are now more prevalent in the world as a result. In parts 1 and 2, we looked at mythic characters. They are harder to kill. They also have mythic points that let them do amazing tasks. They have access to mythic proficiency. They get to add their level plus 10 to checks. And they have abilities that are strong for the level they get access to them at. And this disturbs the widely praised encounter balancing system that is in Pathfinder 2e. It's an encounter system that works, and mythic characters are simply going to have an easier time dealing with non-mythic foes. So we want to punctuate a mythic campaign with the occasional mythic monster. So what does that look like? That is what today's video is about. And a couple of other things. One of the Paizo staff hinted that the awesomeness of kaiju in the campaign setting, which are before now exclusively represented by a series of hazards like collapsing buildings, that you cannot take them on directly. Michael Sayer, director of Rules and Lore, said that yes, mythic characters can actually fight a kaiju directly now, and that kaiju cannot be represented by a stat block. This video also looks at whether they deliver on that statement. And also, because this is the last video I'll do on the mythic rules in this series, I'm going to say my thoughts, including some concerns about the mythic rules that I think people should be aware of. Alright, first to introduce myself. I'm Ronald, the rules lawyer. I am a lawyer who runs tabletop role-playing games. My preferred system is Pathfinder 2e. I ran for 7 years an after-school, middle-school RPG class. I ask you all to support my Patreon. It allows me to continue doing this channel. I don't earn money as an attorney. For more info why, look at the video whose thumbnail's on the screen. Supporting my Patreon gives you ad-free early access to most of my videos and exclusive content. Alright, so how do mythic monsters work? First, the book gives us tools to create our own mythic monsters. We get templates to convert current stat blocks into mythic stat blocks, which also can be guidelines for creating a homebrew mythic monster. First, you look at the level of your creature, or intended creature, and then you refer to this chart. They get everything at their level and lower. After you do the things in this chart, you also are encouraged to use one of the mythic monster templates that we'll get to after explaining this chart. Note that mythic monsters do not get what mythic characters get. They do not get the rewrite fate feature that lets you spend mythic points to re-roll a failed saving throw or skill check. They also aren't harder to kill either. They only get what's on this chart and what is in the template. So all mythic monsters get either mythic resilience or mythic resistance. What are these things? Mythic resilience gets to treat one of their 3 saving throws, fortitude, reflex, or will, as 1 degree of success better every time they roll that save. This is not cumulative with other effects that change their degree of success, like the incapacitation trait. Their other option is mythic resistance, that gives them resistance to damage from strikes from non-mythic creatures. That resistance is equal to half the mythic monster's level. Note that this is impactful in campaigns where the players are not mythic. If the players are mythic, this has 0 impact, and that is something I'm going to comment later in the video. Mythic monsters that are at least level 4 then gain a mythic power. They get a pool of mythic power points, of 3 mythic power points. They don't get the mythic character's rewrite fate ability. They can only use it on the mythic power they gain at this level. The first choice is mythic skill. In only one skill of theirs, if they make a check, they can spend a mythic point to get a +4 untyped bonus in the check. This automatically extends to a second skill at level 12. The other choice is the power to remove a condition, any condition that affects the monster. Anything from enfeebled to slowed to stunned. However, it costs an action to remove the condition. At 7th level, mythic monsters get a repeat of what they got at level 1. They get to choose between mythic resilience or mythic resistance. So you can have mythic resilience in 2 of your 3 saving throws. Mythic resistance, if chosen twice, increases the resistance to the monster's full level. At level 10, mythic monsters get another mythic power. and they can choose recharge. They can also choose one of the previous mythic powers also, because recharge is not relevant to all monsters. Not all monsters will benefit from this. What recharge does is you spend a mythic point to regain an additional use of a spell or ability that is normally only available a limited number of times. This can include a spell slot. By the way, the language "a limited number of times," I think this power can be used more broadly. In this book, we see it apply to things that are comparable to Dragon's Breath, that recharges after 1d4 rounds. So I think the actual intent is that this extends to abilities or spells that you have to wait to be able to use it again. It does cost an action to recharge, though. At level 13, they get yet another Mythic Resilience or Mythic Resistance. At level 17, Mythic monsters get another Mythic power, and this now can include Undying Myth. If that creature would die, they can, as a free action, spend a Mythic point to go back to 50% of their health. They also are standing and conscious if they weren't. This provides a cool moment in a battle, and I would encourage GMs to say that the monsters entered their final form. There actually isn't any suggestion in this book about giving a new power when they recharge like this. That's probably a good, cool idea. Starting at level 20, monsters can get another mythic power or get mythic defenses. This mythic power can now be reroll. When the creature fails a check, they can, as a free action, reroll the check. The other option is mythic defenses. Whenever an attacker rolls a critical hit against this monster, the attacker needs to re-roll the check and accept the new result. Given that these are on level 20 monsters or higher, this is going to kind of reduce vastly the number of critical hits that will happen against a creature. Lastly, at level 23, monsters get mythic immunity. They have one of two choices. Either they become immune entirely to harmful spells cast by non-mythic creatures, or they become immune to strikes from non-mythic weapons, or to unarmed strikes from non-mythic characters. Only the most powerful creatures get immunity to both, and it says that would be at level 25 or higher. So that's what all mythic monsters are supposed to get. In addition, they talk about applying one of 4 mythic monster templates. There's the Ambusher, the Brute, the Caster, and the Striker. These are presented as ways to convert non-mythic stat blocks to mythic ones. However, I think that they should also be used if you are homebrewing a mythic monster from scratch. So let's look at those. The Mythic Ambusher is someone who lies in wait and ambushes the party. They get the extreme skill value for stealth. That refers to the charts and the monster building guidelines in GM Core. Extreme is the very highest value for a given level. They are forbidden from getting Mythic Immunity to strikes, that's the level 23 ability, or Mythic Resistance, which is available at level 1. They are immune to hazards, and it also says that an ambusher of any level gains Mythic Resilience for reflex saving throws. Now, I think that's poorly written. That suggests that you can, at level 1, choose something besides reflex, and still you get Mythic Resilience and reflex. But when I looked at the sample stat blocks, it looks like it's not a free Mythic Resilience. You got to spend your resource on this Mythic Resilience. I think what's meant here is that your first choice, when you're building it from level 1 up, must be Mythic Resilience and reflex saving throws. We see that phrase, a mythic monster of any level gets X, again in the other monster templates. And I don't actually see it implemented that way. I think you have to tax the resource. Each monster template also comes with advice on how to deploy that monster, how to build an encounter around it. For most of these templates, it says, do not use a creature with this template that is 3 or more levels higher than the party. So that's good to know. And other advice, like in the case of the Ambusher, they suggest using hazards that the Ambusher is immune to, that will harry the party. Okay, the next one is the Mythic Brute, someone who's a soldier, who is a bodyguard, or maybe a boss that has weaker minions. They get the extreme skill value for the athletics skill. They also all get a use of mythic points. I assume you have to be level 4 or higher to get a pool of mythic points in the first place, to use this ability called Mythic Ferocity. It's like Ferocity that you'll find in Monster Core, where it's a reaction if they're reduced to 0 hit points and would die. They don't die, they instead stay on their feet with 1 hit point, and their wounded value increases. That's how the normal Ferocity works. But Mythic Ferocity costs a mythic point, and they actually are left with half of their hit points, not just 1 hit point. They also get mythic resistance. That's the resistance to damage from non-mythic creatures. And again, I think this is a mandatory choice at level 1 and not free. They are forbidden from getting mythic resilience to will saves. Also, they have Titanic Might. They get to ignore size limitations on what they can grapple and trip. Next is the Mythic Caster. First, it says that they should use a high spell DC and spell attack modifier for a creature of their level. This is referring to the charts for building spellcasting opponents in GM Core. It says use the extreme spell DC, the very highest, starting at 11th level or higher, which is earlier than the advice in GM Core, which says at 15th level. They also get the extreme skill modifier, the one that corresponds with their spellcasting tradition, so Arcana, Nature, Occultism, or Religion. They gain the mythic power to recharge a spell. Again, I think that's their mandatory first mythic power. Also, they can never get mythic resilience in fortitude saves, nor can they get mythic immunity to strikes, that's the level 23 immunity, or mythic resistance, the resistance to attacks from non-mythic creatures available starting at level 1. Lastly, the Mythic Striker, one that deals out damage only once or twice in a round with big swings, and also wants to move out of direct melee. They get Deadly Striker. If they move 10 or more feet, they do an additional 1d6 precision damage on their next strike. Mythic Mobility. They have the extreme skill modifier for their acrobatics skill. They have Infirmity. They can never get mythic resilience and fortitude saves, and they can never get the remove condition mythic power. But they all have Unimpeded, which lets them cast a mythic point to remove a penalty to their speed, or to escape. If they are immobilized, grabbed, or restrained, they can spend a mythic point and an action to get out of it and automatically succeed. We're then given 4 conversions of non-mythic monsters, each using a different one of these templates. And I'm only going to show one, the Gogiteth. And this is a really cool monster, and one that I had been planning to use in my monster briefing series. It's a level 12 monster. It's one that I think highlights how even melee monsters in Pathfinder are quite interesting compared to D&D 5e. Here's its stat block. Within the 3-action economy, they have these cool things like Skittering Assault. They spend 2 actions to stride 3 times, and with each stride, they can make an attack against a different foe using their full accuracy. Those are attacks with its legs. But if it bites something, it has Improved Grab, a free attempt to grapple the victim. While grabbing a creature, they can squeeze the life out of them with Constrict. And they have a reaction when a foe moves within its reach, so within its 10-foot reach, the Gogiteth can immediately move 10 feet, probably away. And this movement does not provoke reactions. And while they're doing so, if they're grabbing a foe, they have Carry Off Prey. Whoever they're grabbing moves with them when they move. Alright, so that's the non-mythic Gogiteth. Let's look at the mythic version of this creature. We'll see that everything is identical, even the math, except for the mythic changes, and I'm going to point out all of them. It follows the guidelines we looked at mostly. In general, I found that looking through the sample stat blocks in this book, that they implemented maybe 80% of the things in the chart that we looked at. So apparently the designers themselves treat them as guidelines, not requirements. It's a level 12 creature, so that means it can get mythic resilience in 2 saving throws, and it does, in reflex and will saves. This is the ability that they get at level 1 and level 7. And remember that they have an option normally to get mythic resistance to strikes made from non-mythic creatures. But mythic ambushers are forbidden from taking that option. They must take mythic resilience. And I'll point out right now that this is a very powerful ability. They get to treat all of the reflex and will saves as 1 degree of success higher. Now, mythic PCs can spend mythic points to get mythic proficiency on their attacks and spells if they have the right feats. At this level, that can mean an effective +6. This more than counteracts that, however, and it costs a mythic point to get a mythic proficiency. Also, the 1 saving throw it does not have mythic resilience in is also its best. It's fortitude save. So there's not many cracks in this armor. This could lead to frustrating play. And because the mythic ambusher is forbidden from taking mythic resistance, at level 13, they are required, if you follow the chart, to take mythic resilience in the 3rd saving throw. they effectively benefit from the incapacitation effect on all saving throws. There is a good Reddit post that raised this concern, and I'm going to address this issue at the end. At level 4 and level 10, they get mythic powers. The first one is mythic skill, and because it's a level 12 creature, they get to use their mythic point on 2 skills, and in this case, it's athletics and stealth. Remember, they spend a mythic point to get a +4 untyped on the check, and that means they can get a +28 on their athletics check to grapple a creature as a free action when they bite a creature. This is quite powerful, and athletics is strong. It's usually the skill to be afraid of on a monster in my experience. And I ran Fists of the Ruby Phoenix, a high-level adventure path, and I looked at my party when they were level 12, and their fortitude DCs range from 27 to 33. And this creature can get a +28 on its grapple check. A critical success restrains an enemy, making most creatures unable to do anything useful except try to escape. Against that party, this mythic gogiteth would have about a 50% chance to restrain one of the backliners in the party and a 25% chance of restraining a frontliner. And it has 3 mythic points, so this is quite strong. The second mythic power it has is remove a condition. A GM would probably save this, of course, for the very bad conditions that might visit upon it, like blindness or confusion or slowed. These are kind of like how legendary resistances work in D&D 5th edition, except that they require an action to remove the condition. So whatever you did still has an effect temporarily. And also, this is limited to conditions as defined by the game. Also, because it uses the Ambusher template, it uses an extreme value for its stealth modifier, a godly +28, which can be a +32 if they spend a mythic point. It is also immune to hazards. With this very high stealth score and it benefiting from cover, it likely will act first in initiative. Then use Skittering Assault, attack 3 characters, and maybe with its last action try to do a Jaws attack, and if that connects, do Improved Grab, which does not suffer from the multiple attack penalty. So to sum it all up, my main takeaways are that this mythic gogiteth is even better at pulling off an ambush, and it has a very scary grappling ability and can shrug off powerful debuffs like slow or blind, so long as it has mythic points. Once it runs out of mythic points, it's largely characterized by its mythic resilience. It has very stubborn saving throws. Alright, so the next thing to cover are the profiles of mythic monsters in the book. They use the format that is reminiscent of their Lost Omens book, Monsters of Myth, that does 6 pages on each on a bunch of legendary creatures in Golarion. Each section is not just a stat block, it's really seeds of inspiration and a toolbox, including sometimes stat blocks of hazards and skill challenges for a GM to use in incorporating that monster as a campaign arc, an adversary, or just an interesting NPC that can have a tenuous relationship with the party over time. We are presented with 7 mythic monsters, and they range from campaign-ending monsters that are above level 20 to the level 6 Sublime Breaths and the level 11 Immortal Trickster. Now, I'm just going to straight up read the summaries of these. Many people just listen to my videos in the background and treat me like a podcast, so I'm going to indulge them. And also, these summaries are better than what I could come up with. Vulot is the demon lord of stolen identities, a powerful foe who could be anywhere and anyone. Vulot, or Vulot, I don't know how to pronounce it, is a high-level monster suitable as the final opponent in a mythic campaign, or a lurking threat whose servants and alternate identities foil the PCs in their early adventures. The Immortal Trickster is an ancient spiritual entity who can transform into wily creatures. Suitable as friend or foe, the Immortal Trickster has the ability to bond with mortals, bringing out additional strength and competence in them, but dooming them to a sad fate that seems to inevitably follow those who get caught up in the trickster's schemes. The mighty kaiju Agyra, or Agyra, again, I don't know how to pronounce these things, is a multi-headed force of nature capable of leveling cities and shaking the foundations of earth and firmament alike. The Oliphant of Jandalay is an immortal force of destruction, often associated with rune lords and other spellcasters whose magical power is rivaled only by their hubris. The Oliphant's very presence can curse a region to lasting devastation. A sublime breath is a mythic fey artist who can inspire mortals. That inspiration can become a fatal temptation for mortals who attempt to steal the sublime breath's immaculate instrument and claim an everlasting muse. Varix that was once an orc demigod, but his immortal form has been stretched and distorted into a profane malignancy by the influence of Rovagug. Now one of Rovagug's newest and most terrifying spawn, Varix that was rampages toward a faraway call. The Weaver of Webs was once the herald of Ulon, or perhaps it still is. Ancient and powerful, with dominion over spiders, the Weaver lurks in dark places and devours those who travel too far in pursuit of secrets. So since we're looking at whether they deliver the promise of presenting kaiju to fight, I'm naturally going to look at the kaiju Agyra. Up until now, kaiju were solely represented in Pathfinder by a series of high-level hazards, as you're not able to fight them directly. They're too powerful. Here's one example of a collapsing structure that one kaiju creates in the book Monsters and Myth. The Paizo staff are saying that you can now take on kaiju directly as a mythic creature. Well, they present the mythic kaiju Agyra in this book. And do they deliver? Well, yes, they present a level 23 stat block that is like a level 23 stat block with mythic powers added. I will editorialize on this later. And also, after I talk about Agyra in depth, I will also give a glimpse of a more powerful mythic monster presented in this book, the one in the thumbnail, the big elephant. Each mythic monster gets a 6-page write-up. Like the sections in Monsters and Myth, they are inspiration for game masters. They can design an entire campaign arc or even an entire campaign with this monster as the climax of it, using one of these sections for inspiration. And also, they often provide crunch. Each follows a similar format. First, there's an overview of the creature. They employ different techniques to convey the creature. Sometimes they use fiction, sometimes poetry. Here, Agyra's origins are described as resulting from humans trying to deal with the aftermath of Earthfall, the cataclysmic event from many thousands of years ago, and trying to trap the energies of the storms that rocked the oceans beneath the earth, beneath the ocean, which spawned a volcano island called Spine Scar Island in the middle of nowhere. And Agyra is a 2-headed pteranodon with a 150-foot wingspan that is covered in razor-sharp blades and spines that likes to sleep on top of the volcano. The island is particularly verdant and bountiful, with humans living there, superstitious humans that don't have much contact with the outside world because of how dangerous it is to sail to the place. Primal energies abound on the island, both expressed in the richness of the wildlife and the flora, but also in the extreme weather that takes place. The people on the island view Agyra like many traditional societies revere and fear nature gods. Benevolent and malevolent acts of nature are attributed to her. She's very protective of the people living on the island, and all of this gave me strong Spirit Island vibes, an excellent strategy board game, cooperative board game that all of you should play, which you can also play on Tabletop Simulator or as an app on Google Play. In fact, one of the videos I wanted to make is a strategy video for this game. One day. See my shirt? The next thing we see in these write-ups are story ideas for different bands of levels for your player group. For some of the lower level mythic monsters in this book, there are suggestions of them having interesting interactions with the party, and they are a way to spice up a campaign that's otherwise dealing with a bigger threat. For the high level mythic monsters in this book, like this one, they read like sketches for Paizo adventure paths, using classical storytelling techniques to build up a villain. You're given plot beats. Some of these profiles talk about a cult that worships the end boss and dealing with the machinations of that organization. You might have a benefactor who's trying to research defeating the ultimate boss. Research is a theme, by the way, and getting information and getting artifacts is a theme in a lot of these write-ups. Your benefactor might have an ulterior motive. Maybe the villain will make a surprise early appearance. A lot of the kinds of things you find in Paizo adventure paths, and they say at what level ranges these things make sense. The next thing this book shows, then, is the stat block for the creature, which we won't get to yet. We'll save that for the last. After that are the mythic deeds that come with this creature. Mythic deeds, we'll remember, are great accomplishments that, when achieved, gives everyone in the party their full 3 mythic points. On the screen, I'm showing only one of them, called the Spine Scar Prize, a coming-of-age tradition among the people who live on the island. You deal with a very difficult skill challenge to get a facsimile of one of Agyra's scales. This is potentially a way a group of outsiders, can win the favor or friendship of the people on the island. Another mythic deed presented is stealing the Twin Spine, the crystal that is embedded in between Agyra's 2 necks. The other mythic deeds are 3 hazards, 2 of them complex hazards, that reflect Agyra's effect on the island. One of them is simply her flying overhead and creating a hurricane force wind that affects the party and can be used in the middle of another encounter. Alright, so now let's look at the stat block. It is a level 23 stat block and has features of other stat blocks that we've seen from Paizo within this range, math-wise, and also the drama of its abilities. We'll see that it has nearly all the benefits from the chart that we started this video with. However, it does not have any of the 4 monster templates applied, whose original intention was for converting non-mythic monsters anyway, though I still think they're useful guidelines. First, let's look at its non-mythic features. The first thing I want to point out is that it is a gargantuan creature, which in Pathfinder 2e means that it occupies a 20-foot by 20-foot space. And this is one of the things I don't like about Pathfinder 2e stat blocks. I think they should make big creatures bigger more often. We have precedent for this. We have the Moose Spore from the 2019 Bestiary, which takes up a 50-foot by 50-foot area. Also, it has a fly speed of 60 feet. There are dragons much lower level that fly at least twice as fast as that. I was not impressed by that, especially since it supposedly can create hurricane force winds. Alright, first let's look at its important non-mythic abilities, which in my estimation are on par with what you'll see with level 23 creatures in Pathfinder. First, it has regeneration 30. That means every time its turn starts, it gains 30 hit points back. And it does this even if it is unconscious. Additionally, your dying value can never increase to a number that would cause you to die. This monster ability often can be turned off by inflicting a certain damage type. This creature has no such damage type. It is always on. It's like some other legendary creatures we see, like the Tarrasque. This means that the only way to kill Agyra is through a instant kill effect, like something with the death trait, and probably while she's first reduced to low hit points when you do so. Alright, the next thing is electrified rebirth. When she dies, her corpse crackles and sparks with electrical energy. After 1 minute, she is immediately resurrected in the same place at full health, and she normally takes advantage of this to do Thunderous Departure, one of her other abilities. With 3 actions, we have her legendary speed expressed here. She gets to move up to a mile, leaving behind a thunderous sonic boom, creating a 100-foot burst centered on her point of departure, doing 15d10 sonic damage with a DC 46 basic fortitude save, which can deafen permanently. That's pretty awesome. It has a powerful lightning breath, can breathe from both of her heads at once in 2 long lines. On a failed save, a target is slowed 1 for 1 to 4 rounds. That's pretty strong. Alright, so now let's look at what makes her mythic. Let's start with what she gets from the chart. She gets mythic resilience in fortitude and reflex saves. Now, remember there are 3 points in that chart where you can get mythic resilience or mythic resistance. She doesn't have mythic resistance, so she's supposed to get 3 benefits here. Here's a case where they are not strictly following the chart. Also, in this description of mythic resilience, they hide the level 20 ability to force rerolls of critical hits against her. That's called mythic defenses. That probably should have had its own entry in bold. It's easy to miss, and I see this happen more than once in this book. Also, she's entitled to 3 mythic powers from that chart, and she only has 2 here. However, it makes sense in this case because she has other ways to spend her mythic points, and maybe that's what's taking the place of the missing mythic resilience. She has the recharge ability to recharge her lightning breath. Agyra can also spend a mythic point to remove a condition. She also gets a level 23 mythic immunity against strikes. This is the one that lets her ignore, she's immune to strikes made with non-mythic weapons and unarmed strikes from non-mythic characters. If the party has mythic weapons, you're golden. If you don't have mythic weapons, then our mythic characters need to punch and kick her, or do other things besides strikes. Alright, she also has unique ways to use mythic points. She gets to conjure a hurricane. She gets to do this once per day and create a hurricane with a 4-mile radius with a calm eye in the center. She doesn't have to be in the eye of the storm. And she, meanwhile, gets to ignore the effects of high winds and also precipitation and clouds and their effect on sight. She gets to ignore that with her Stormflight and Stormsight abilities. She might do this to have an advantage in a fight, or it's something that the party has to deal with before encountering her on a typical day on the island. The next one's pretty amazing. It's called Blinding Flash. She spreads her wings and while on the ground and creates this flash that can blind and stupefy enemies up to 10 minutes. A regular failure blinds and stupefies you for 1 minute. And a successful save still dazzles and stupefies you for 1 to 4 rounds. Quite strong. So let's evaluate this mythic abilities. Do they convey her mythicness? And is a mythic party able to deal with these challenges? How do they affect the fight? Mythic resilience on fortitude and reflex saves is very strong. You want to only attack her armor class or things that call for will saving throws. Note that mythic resilience only affects checks. It doesn't affect passive DCs based on these saving throws. So a legendary mythic wrestler who can probably muster a plus 40 at this level by spending a mythic point has a fair chance to grapple Agyra, who has a DC of 47. Mythic resilience does not help her in her passive. And mythic resilience doesn't help her here. Yes, Megan? Yeah. I'll feed you. I failed my will save. Remove a condition is also a problem for high-level parties, because when you're fighting higher-level creatures in Pathfinder, debuffs are often needed to defeat them. You have to even out the math. It'll be harder to make debuffs stick to her. Also, with mythic defenses, she forces rerolls of critical hits, so you're hardly ever going to critically hit her. The level 23 ability, mythic immunity kind of doesn't matter if the party has mythic weapons. In the campaign, it's kind of mandatory to give players the opportunity to find mythic weapons, otherwise your martial characters will do 0 damage with their weapons. And we have the fact that she has regeneration, with no way of turning it off. That's a non-mythic ability. And I just now, while recording this, have realized that she's immune to death effects, so I have no idea how she can die. But even if there a way to bypass that immunity somehow, I don't know if there is, because of her mythic resilience on fortitude saves, the vast majority of killing spells are target fortitude, it'll be hard to land that. I think it's actually this non-mythic immunity to death effects and her unturn-offable regeneration, which are both non-mythic, that makes her impossible to kill. This level 23 mythic creature is the solo severe mythic monster that in the last video we saw the book advises to use against a party only at their full power while they have mythic gear. And this is also a level where gaining mythic proficiency on a check, because you're already master or legendary on the most useful checks that you're going to be making at this level, will only give you a +2 or a +4 bonus. Due to how mythic proficiency works, you cannot bend the math the way you were able to at low levels. However, the X factor is all of the amazing abilities we saw in the last video that mythic destinies give you. So was this promise met that you can represent kaiju as mythic monsters that you can fight directly in the game now? Well, it depends on how you read this. Did you want a kaiju fight that has a stat block? They delivered on that. We have a stat block, and you can fight it, and it has mythic abilities that put it above the norm. But I imagine most people saw this and thought, ooh, it's going to be amazing. It's going to be a whole other tier of power. And thought maybe we would see something that would evoke the fantasy conveyed by all of those difficult hazards that parties had to contend with because they could not take on the kaiju directly. A lot of the abilities that we saw can be grafted onto non-kaiju stat blocks that are higher level than level 23. There basically was an expectations problem. The whole point of kaiju before now was that you couldn't fight them. The old truism that goes back to the earliest days of D&D, that once you give stats to a god and can kill them, that you make them less awe-inspiring and more mundane, still holds true today. If we're asking for and want a stat block, then the whole point is to be able to defeat it, right? Now, they could have presented a stat block that was much more powerful than this, and given us much stronger abilities for mythic characters that could take that creature on. They could have uptuned what mythic characters get, and I'll address that in the final thoughts. Meanwhile, if you want to make this kaiju more awesome, then you can increase its math and or use abilities from higher level creatures that are already available that are published by Paizo and graft them on, including from the level 25 mythic monster that we'll look at in a moment. Meanwhile, with Agyra, we see that level continues to mean level. Level continues to matter. With all the advantages that brings, you can still present a challenging fight that is fair. By having mythic monsters be reachable and not being an entire tier above non-mythic, it's actually possible for a non-mythic party to take on Agyra in a campaign where they might not have mythic abilities but get access to mythic gear, for example, where you incorporate some elements from this book into a otherwise non-mythic campaign. The thumbnail for this video shows the Oliphant of Jandelay, the level 25 mythic monster presented in this book. I'll just give a glimpse of two of its special abilities that are powered by mythic points. First is Trumpeting Blast. In a 120-foot cone, it shoots out noise from its trunk. It actually does not need a mythic point to do this, but spending a mythic point increases the DC from 49 to a godly 51 and increases the damage dice. But it does sonic damage, and on the failed saving throw, enemies are slowed 1 for 2 rounds. If they critically fail, which is quite likely with that DC, they are slowed 2 for 2 rounds and take 28 d10 sonic damage. It also can do Devastating Launch. This is pretty dramatic. Spends a mythic point and buries its tusks into the ground in a 15-foot burst centered within 20 feet of it. It has the same 20 by 20 foot gargantuan size that I complained about earlier, by the way. But it collects everything in its area and tosses them up to 120 feet away. They must do a reflex save to avoid being thrown. So I wanted to give a glimpse of that. This is something that can fight and destroy armies, which Agyra kind of could do too. Okay, some final thoughts. I really like the mythic rules. I just think it's exciting to see more power in a high fantasy game. It means bigger dramatic moments, both on the player end and on the monster end, from both sides. But I do have a couple of concerns that I'll talk about here. First is the mythic resilience ability, the one that lets them increase their degree of success on saving throws. It's already concerning when they get this on 2 of their saving throws, which I guess incentivizes using recall knowledge to find out which of their saving throws should be attacked. But it becomes quite bad when they get this on all 3 of their saving throws. It means that effectively every spell has the incapacitation trait and treats them as a boss creature, which vastly lessens the effectiveness of characters that rely on abilities that have DCs. Spellcasters are the most obvious case. My other concern is on-off mechanics. Some of the mythic abilities from that chart have 0 effect on mythic parties. Mythic resistance only affects strikes from non-mythic creatures. Mythic immunity, a 23rd level ability, has 0 impact if the party has mythic weapons, or if you're a mythic monk. It's kind of reminiscent of D&D 5e's problem of many monsters having resistance to all non-magical bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. It's quite devastating if you don't have magic weapons, but once the party has magic weapons, it is a non-ability on the stat block. It doesn't convey anything that this is a mythic creature if it has no mechanical impact. It just presents a situation where, oh, you're mythic? Well, I'm mythic too. Which is kind of cool, I guess, but not that interesting in a fight. And already there's a perception among some that casters are less powerful than martial characters in Pathfinder 2e. And it seems like these abilities have a disproportionate effect on the experience of spellcasting players. And I think these two problems are kind of related. I do wonder whether this approach of this thing matters a whole lot, except when it doesn't, should be turned instead into a bonus that is very strong against non-mythic creatures, but less strong, but still impactful against mythic opponents. Like, for example, maybe mythic resilience would act this way against non-mythic foes only, but against mythic opponents, it's a +4, +5 or something. The other thing I want to talk about is that I see in the discussions about these rules, which have not been officially released yet. It's basically discussions on the subreddit based on the little snippets people are getting. There's a little hand-wringing going on. And a lot of these concerns come from two opposite camps. I'm going to make broad generalizations about people, and I don't mean to offend anybody. However, I just want to do this to assist the discussion. But I would say there are some in Group A who enjoy Pathfinder 2e and are drawn to it because it provides a satisfying tactical game. For them, balance among options and the ability to provide a challenging but fair fight using a working encounter system for the GM is very valuable. And they're worried that some of the options, some of the mythic options, and also some of the non-mythic options, admittedly, in this new book might be threatening that balance. On those non-mythic things, I've actually not looked at them yet. This is all secondhand. I'll call that Group A. And then there's Group B, who is attracted to Pathfinder because you get to do really awesome things. They're really flavorful abilities. And there's an article published in PC Gamer recently that kind of conveys this point of view. It says, after DMing a bunch of D&D 5e, swapping over to Pathfinder 2e has felt like hanging out with a cool TTRPG uncle that lets you smoke weed. You want to have laser eyes at level 1? Sure, buddy. Pathfinder 2e has a lot of very flavorful feats that really convey the feeling that you're badass and awesome in a way that I think other systems don't do to the same degree. When you're in the bubble of the Pathfinder 2e subreddit or my channel or my Discord, where we like to talk about how Pathfinder 2e is balanced and supports GMs, it's easy to forget what attracts a lot of people to a game like this, that there are really cool things that you can do as a character in Pathfinder, and it's really fucking fun. And so I've seen opinions that are disappointed by the mythic rules because it doesn't let them play out that power fantasy that they saw. Maybe they played first edition Pathfinder or the Alcat CRPG Wrath of the Righteous that implements its own even more dramatic, I would say, version of those mythic rules from first edition. I've seen some of that expression of disappointment in the reaction to my first video and in some early previews. The first video, of course, only dealt with abilities before level 12. I hope the second video, which has not gone public yet at the time I'm recording this, assuages some of those concerns. But there are people, I'm sure, who it won't, because in Wrath of the Righteous, you could be a gold dragon. You could be a worm that walks, a walking swarm of worms. The designers of Pathfinder have a real problem in trying to placate these two masters. They need to provide something epic with these rules, while also maintaining the gradual progression from level 1 to 20 of escalating challenges, and have epic characters not trivialize non-mythic fights, which, if mythic encounters and mythic monsters are to maintain their dramatic weight, you still want the majority of fights to be against non-mythic foes. Alright, so the usual advice that you find online is to run Pathfinder 2e as written. And there's a reference that I like to make myself to Chesterton's fence. If you see a fence in the middle of a field and don't know why it's there, don't tear it down. It's there for a reason. For example, in Pathfinder, it costs you an action to move up to your speed, which the entire game is designed around that assumption that movement costs an action, and that increasing distance between you and an enemy has a tactical effect because they have to spend an action to walk up to you. However, in talking about mythic rules, I, the rules lawyer, will say I think that in a mythic campaign, you should feel much freer to house rule. Now, why? Well, first, you're signing up for a unique experience already. The whole point is to make the characters more powerful than most of their enemies. You're disrupting the encounter balancing system. And also, there'll be mythic monsters that surprise the party. You want the moments to be larger. The very nature of mythic rules destabilizes the game. To some extent, you'll be improvising at all times anyway. The other reason why you should feel freer to house rule and tweak these rules is they didn't playtest them. And that's actually a complaint I will register. The first edition Pathfinder mythic rules were quite janky, and they were never playtested also. And they definitely could have benefited from a playtest process. And I think the same is true here. Given that the mythic rules turned out to be the main purpose of this book, I am not happy that they didn't put out some test document for people to give feedback. It seems like they prioritized the 2 new classes because they concluded that most people will not be playing mythic campaigns, and more players will be using the 2 new classes than will be using the mythic rules. And so why put an equal effort into playtesting mythic rules? Which I think was a mistake. I think it would have been really good to have tested, refined rules for mythic monsters and characters that could still be used in non-mythic campaigns that the vast majority of tables run. It could be provided at a particular moment. There are ways that they could be incorporated piecemeal to spice up otherwise non-mythic campaigns. So I have a few ideas in this front, but before I talk about them, let's look at the variant mythic rules that they have released, that Paizo has released, that are official variant rules for the mythic rules. First, they talk about having a party where not every character is mythic. This allows a different kind of story. However, they understood that the non-mythic characters probably shouldn't be left behind. And so what they suggest is allowing free archetype for the non-mythic characters only, because the mythic character will already be having their own set of bonus feats, the bonus mythic feats that they're getting, and in addition to their mythic powers. Uh-oh, here's Megan. Hi, Megan. Oh, don't get on my table. Oh, no. Go on my lap. Those are my notes, Megan. I need to read them. Sit. No! The other variant rule is much more interesting to me, however. It's called alternate mythic progression, which essentially divorces advancement in your mythic power from levels. This is actually how first edition Pathfinder's mythic rules worked. Your mythic power, in theory at least, did not have anything to do with what level you were. What matters is that you accomplish mythic trials. Mythic trials advance you on a separate track from your XP that give you increasing mythic power. This is actually quite similar to the popular milestone XP variant, where moments in the story and your accomplishments are what advance you. This certainly has its appeal, and the whole point of mythic rules is to enhance the storytelling after all. So you have to accomplish mythic trials. And what is a mythic trial? It's either completing a mythic deed, which was already defined in the earlier video, or defeating one or more mythic monsters in a combat encounter. It can also be a series of non-mythic tasks that collectively constitute a great accomplishment. They kind of restate the same thing down here. And here's the chart. Your first mythic trial lets you achieve mythicdom, and you get your calling and your other benefits like your mythic points and being hard to kill. By the way, this chart says encounter, but it should say mythic trial. From there, every 2 mythic trials gives you another mythic tier, and you get a new mythic feat at every tier instead of every 2 levels of experience. Once you're trying to achieve your mythic destiny with tier 6, it takes 3 mythic trials per tier to advance. To reach the highest tier requires 4 mythic trials. This allows you to structure your campaign and your story in a different way. Some people might find the mythic abilities before level 6 to be kind of mid, basically increasing your skill abilities. You're basically Luke Skywalker in the first two Star Wars movies. You are a cut above the rest. You're like a chosen one with a bright future ahead of you, but not there yet. Maybe you want a more dramatic entrance into Mythicton. Maybe something like what happens in the Wrath of the Righteous Adventure Path and Alcat computer game, where you are not mythic for a while, and then at some point, you suddenly get all this power. Well, the alternate mythic rules, the official ones, explicitly allow for this possibility and say that you can attain your mythic power at a higher level. It also advises that you don't get all this mythic mojo at once, that maybe you grow into these abilities, albeit at an accelerated rate, to catch up to the normal progression, let's call it. Or maybe you all want to be overwhelmed by your own awesomeness. Go ahead, take it all. Do what you want, house rule it, and maybe we can find ways to use the mythic rules that can please Group B. Pathfinder is a flexible system after all. Why not take the invitation from the official alternate mythic rules, divorcing mythic tiers from level, and run with it? What if you get mythic destinies at level 2 and treat your level as 10 higher for purposes of taking more mythic feats? You still have Pathfinder's tools to challenge a stronger party, like having more XP assigned to encounters. Also, while we're at it, those level 20 mythic armor and weapon runes, maybe get those much earlier than level 20 or level 19, when normally by the treasure distribution rules of Pathfinder is the first time you're able to access level 20 gear. Maybe the last 5 or so levels in your story can involve the party questing to find those fabled mythic items. Another possibility is that the entire campaign from 1 to 20 is the party at various times trying to seek and obtain mythic power for the characters one at a time. Because Pathfinder didn't playtest these mythic rules, I think there is interest in a third-party publication publishing some variant rules here that could also address some of the concerns I raised about the rules. The fact that they didn't playtest the rules should actually make you feel freer to make the rules your own. After all, it seems like the whole point of a mythic campaign is to center the story around the player characters, to tell your own story. So it's only fitting and natural to treat these rules in the same way, treat them as yours, to tell your own story. So that's it. I'm now done covering the mythic rules. I now move on to the new classes in War of Immortals, which is funny. I usually start with the classes. That's usually what everyone's interested in, but this is an exception. Subscribe to my channel and ring the bell to get notified. But also, if you want to see the videos earlier, right when I upload them, support my Patreon, which gives you early access and also access to exclusive content. Additionally, join my Discord. I hang out there a lot. We talk Pathfinder 2e and other gaming. You can also play Pathfinder 2e there in our organized play system called Endless Tale Tavern. So that's it. I've been Ronald the Rules Lawyer. I'll see you next time.